In this video, we're going to be answering the age-old question: do you need a gimbal for modern-day smartphone videography, specifically for the current iPhone 12? I know it's a little early for me to be stepping in here, but I just wanted to give you a little heads up that throughout this video you'll be seeing two different versions of me. One that's wearing this yellow t-shirt and another that's wearing a black t-shirt, and those represent the two different parts of myself that have recorded different parts of this video at different times. So I initially recorded the first kind of set of sequences, which you'll see in a bit, where I'm outdoors actually testing the smartphone with and without a gimbal. I recorded that like 2 months ago, but I'm only kind of editing through the footage today, and that's why you're going to see this big disparity in how I look and kind of how I talk and the clothes that I'm wearing, etc. So throughout this video, you'll be seeing me use arguably the best smartphone for videography at the moment, the iPhone 12, as well as arguably the best gimbal for smartphone videography at the moment, the DJI OM4. The reason why I'm doing this test is because I purchased this gimbal to use with my old Samsung Galaxy S8, which at the time didn't really have the best stabilization when recording video. And so I thought that by upgrading to using a gimbal, I'd be able to get better stabilized footage, which would overall improve the quality of the videos that I was creating. However, within a month of purchasing this new gimbal, the new iPhone 12 was released, and I decided that I did want to invest in a better phone that would be able to not only have better stabilization, but also better quality video. And so I decided to buy that new iPhone. And so for less than a month, I used this gimbal with this phone. And now I had read a number of reviews of the iPhone 12, which said that the stabilization of it was really good for a smartphone. And so it begs the question, do I really need a gimbal for smartphone videography when using a camera such as on the iPhone 12? And did I waste my money on this particular device? He did. So let's get into it. Okay, just another quick heads up before we get into the actual comparison footage. I just want to say that the audio in the next one and a half minutes is really bad because it was really windy where I was filming, and so I apologize for that. You can skip to this particular timestamp to avoid all that audio, which isn't necessarily that important anyway. It's just basically going through some of the reasons why I chose 24 frames per second, why I'm not using HDR footage, and why I'm just using the native camera app, not the DJI Mimo app. So if you're not interested in any of that, just skip to this particular timestamp and you'll be good to go. All right, let's get into the actual footage. So we're out here in this beautiful park, and this is where we're going to be comparing the stabilization of the iPhone 12 with and without a gimbal. I apologize profusely for how windy and loud it is. Hopefully I won't be recording much audio out here, so you don't have to sit through all this noise. Now, to make this as comprehensive as possible, there are a number of tests that I'm planning on performing comparing the stabilization of the iPhone 12 with and without a gimbal. These are a static shot of a subject, a pan left, a right, a tilt up, down, a dolly in or push in, a dolly out or push out, a boom, a camera roll, a posterior tracking shot of a subject, a trucking shot of a subject, an arc around a subject, and a hyperlapse. So there's a few different things that I want to mention before we get started. I'm going to shoot all of these shots with Dolby Vision HDR turned off. And I'm just going to be doing that because it's easier for my editing software to use. So additionally, I'm going to be using the native camera app only. I know that there is a DJI Mimo app for the gimbal, which allows you to maximally utilize the functions of the gimbal. But to allow a better comparison between the two, I thought that it would be more fair if I only use the native camera app. But I will talk a little bit more about some of the functions of the DJI Mimo app at the end of this video. I'm also going to be shooting everything in 4K 24 FPS just to make it consistent. And finally, obviously, it goes without saying that the level of your personal hand shakiness will affect whether you are more likely or less likely to need a gimbal. So keep that in mind when watching this video. Okay, and with all of that out of the way, let's actually get into the video where we compare the stabilization of the iPhone 12 with and without a gimbal. Okay, so you've seen the footage now, and before we go any deeper, let me know in the comments section below what you think about the footage that you saw, whether the handheld was comparable to the gimbal. Right now we're going to go into more detail into each of the different shots that I took and talk about whether or not handheld was better than or equal to the gimbal, and whether it's really necessary to even have a gimbal for modern smartphones. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the different shots and either award a point to the handheld or the gimbal. So I think, in my opinion, if the handheld is equivalent to or better than the gimbal, the point should be awarded to handheld, because if it's the same as a gimbal, then there's no point in having a gimbal. And obviously if it's better, then there's no point in having a gimbal either. And then in the scenarios where the gimbal is better, it will get the point. So that's kind of how the scoring system will work. And then at the end, we'll look through these scores and kind of compare, and hopefully this will help you make a decision as to whether you need to purchase a gimbal for your smartphone or not. So let's jump into the computer again. Okay, so we start with shot one, which is the static shot. Having a look at it, to my eyes, there doesn't really appear to be a significant difference between the handheld and the gimbal footage. There's no extra jitteriness in handheld. So I think that the point goes to handheld for being the same as, or maybe even slightly better than the gimbal. Alright, shot two, the panning shot. So this is wigging me out a bit because the gimbal is moving at a faster speed than the handheld. But I look at that handheld and I just think that is so usable. And especially if you shoot that at 60 frames per second, you slow it down a bit, you can definitely get great handheld footage for a pan at least, because you can see there's not really any up and down movement in the handheld. And the gimbal, it's the same. It is panned slightly faster, so it's a little bit more blurry and more difficult to see, but I think the handheld again is more than usable. It's good actually, and so I think I'm going to award the point to the handheld again. So that's 2-0 to handheld. Let's see how it goes with the tilt. They both look pretty smooth. Honestly, again, I think that the handheld is equally as good as the gimbal in this scenario. And I think that makes sense because, you're not really moving anywhere. You're just standing in one place and moving up and down. And while, you expect that the gimbal would improve the quality and be able to get rid of those micro jitters, I think that you can see in this footage that the handheld or the iPhone itself has good enough stabilization that it's able to reduce any micro jitters, even though this is just an iPhone 12 without that in-body image stabilization. Okay, so again, I'm giving this one to the handheld for being equal to the gimbal. Alright, moving on to the dolly in. So I think this is where the gimbal is first a little bit more noticeable. I think you can see that I'm clearly not doing the best job of doing this dolly, because you can kind of see the up and down motion of the camera with each step that I take, and kind of like the side to side sway as well. But I think that you can see that the gimbal, or to my eyes, the gimbal looks a little bit more smooth and it's not shaking from side to side as much. So I'm going to award this one to the gimbal. Okay, moving to the dolly out. Okay, I can already tell just by looking at this handheld footage that, you know, it's really shaking side to side a lot due to each step that I take. My hands are swaying like this. And I think for that reason, this is probably going to be needed to be excluded, because this footage is actually just bad in both situations. Like you can see stopping and starting. But I think the gimbal is potentially, well, I think the gimbal does look better. The handheld definitely has more stopping and starting, but I think I'm going to exclude this one from the overall picture, because the quality of this footage is just not good enough. You can see, like, yeah, it's shaking side to side hugely, even in the gimbal one. So yeah, all right, we'll leave this one out of our final results. All right, moving on to the boom or move upwards. All right, so to my eyes, both are reasonably good, and I would be happy to take either of them. There's not really any shakiness in either options. You can see that the horizon in the gimbal one is slightly off. And that's one of the things that I should mention about the gimbal. It is a little bit more difficult to kind of, you know, operate it and get it so that the horizon is exactly as you need, because sometimes it fights you. You want to get it in a certain position and it fights you. And I'm sure that's because I'm not the most skilled operator, and so I'm not necessarily using it the best as it's supposed to be used. But, you know, that's just another thing to take into consideration. It's just another piece of gear that you need to learn how to use. And so I think, yeah, in this, I think the handheld is more than capable in this particular shot, and so I'm giving the point to handheld again. All right, so now the roll. So I'm looking at both, and you can see that the branches and leaves are really shaking in the wind, which makes this quite difficult to tell how much shakiness there is and how much it's just, you know, the wind causing the branches to blow. But I think that this is still a test that I want to include, because this is a potential shot that I would use in my videos. This style of shot where, you know, you get a bit of the sun flares. I think it's a particularly good looking shot, or it can be. In this case, it's not particularly interesting, but it's all right. Anyway, so to me, both the gimbal and the handheld are good, and I would be more than happy to use either of them. And so, yeah, in my eyes, I'm going to award the point to the handheld because it's the same as the gimbal. All right, the walking tracking shot now. To me, there's no real significant difference between these two in terms of stabilization. Both appear quite good and there's no real shakiness. So again, I'm going to award the points to handheld because, you know, I think it's equal to the gimbal in this particular shot. Okay, so what is it now? I think it's 6-1 to handheld, which is definitely not what I was expecting at this stage, or even when I started recording the video. I didn't expect that handheld would be this kind of comparable to using a smartphone gimbal. Trucking. So as I'm watching this, to me the gimbal looks so smooth. The handheld is a little bit less smooth, so I think this one's going to go to the gimbal. But in saying that, I think the handheld could, you know, it's definitely usable, but I still would give the point to the gimbal. All right, let's look at the arc now. All right, straight off the bat, I think that the gimbal looks better. You're just seeing a little bit of up and down motion here in the handheld as I try and walk around, whereas the gimbal is holding it a lot more steady. But again, you can see that the horizon is sloped, but I think that's more due to user error rather than, you know, the actual gimbal being defective or anything like that. So this one goes to the gimbal. Oh, this is not the panning shot. I'll have to make sure to edit that out. So this is the hyperlapse. Look, this is a pretty bad kind of comparison because both shots, this is a bad hyperlapse for one, and you can see that the sky is flickering a lot here in the handheld shot, and I think that's just because of the camera and exposure changes. So I think this one needs to be excluded as well because it's really just a bad example of a hyperlapse. Because when I've watched other people's videos like Andy Toe, you should check out his channel. He's got great videos on smartphone videography. But in one of his videos, he talks about using a gimbal for hyperlapses, and they look really good when he does them. So again, I think this is just my bad on this particular shot. So the final results are that the handheld received 6 points and the gimbal received 3 points. Now, I know this wasn't the most scientific test, so please no flame for that. And I know that I personally ruined 3 of the shots because of my poor, lazy videography techniques. But I think that what this test shows us is that, well, 1, I need to improve my videography skills, but 2, and more importantly, modern smartphones are more than capable of shooting good enough video just using your hands alone. You don't necessarily need a gimbal to make it any more cinematic looking. And I think that's a really important point to raise because, you know, you don't need to necessarily go out and spend an extra 240 or 50 Australian dollars, which is about maybe 200 US dollars, maybe a bit less than that, on something like a gimbal, and instead it's probably better that you spend that money on other things like better lights or better audio, etc. Now, to finish off this video, I thought it'd be a good idea to share my experiences using this gimbal and also talk about some specific use cases where I think it might actually be a good idea to invest in some form of smartphone gimbal. This gimbal has a number of features beyond just stabilizing footage. It's able to function as a tripod, albeit a slightly bad one because when you're placing your phone on this, it kind of just drifts from side to side like that, which makes it not necessarily the most stable tripod, but at least it doesn't move up and down. It has a number of built-in features like dynamic zoom and story mode and spin shot, which are all cool features to try out, but they're not ultimately the reason why I bought this smartphone gimbal. It has active track, so it can track you as you move around. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the reason that I bought this gimbal was to stabilize the footage of my Samsung Galaxy S8 and subsequently my iPhone 12. And as we've seen throughout this video, it isn't actually that necessary for modern day smartphones. So in short, yes, it was a bit of a waste of money for me personally and my specific use case, but that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be worthwhile for you. So some of the situations where I think it would be useful to have a gimbal like this, there's kind of 3 main ones that I can think of. 1, if you're someone who is absolutely dedicated to smartphone videography, you're never going to ever look at purchasing a camera or anything like that, you're only ever going to use smartphones, then I think that there are some marginal situations where this is more useful than handheld footage, and in those situations I think that it is worthwhile buying a gimbal. Another situation where I think it would be useful to have this gimbal is where you're recording footage using an old phone and you don't plan on upgrading anytime soon. So if this old phone doesn't really have good stabilization already built in, then it might be worthwhile getting one of these. But you know, on the flip side, it's 250 Australian dollars, so you could put that money towards a newer phone that has better stabilization, because apart from the iPhone 12, there are other phones out there that are very capable as well, though I haven't personally used any of them because I am no tech YouTuber who has the ability to, you know, try out multiple phones. But I'm pretty sure that other brands are making comparable video quality phones as well. So the third case, and this is just a bit of a meme, but if you've got loads of money to burn and you're just looking for a new toy to play with, then go ahead, buy this gimbal. It'll give you a few days worth of entertainment, so you know, for whatever that's worth, go ahead and buy it. For everyone else, I don't think this particular gimbal makes the most compelling argument. There are some other ones like the Zhiyun, I'm not sure what it's called. I'll link the name somewhere in the description or up here. And what it is it also has a built-in selfie stick, and I think that could potentially be more useful. The fact that, you know, you can help you take selfies, whereas this one, it doesn't extend any further than this. So, you know, you can hold it out like that, but you're not getting much more kind of, you know, range than what your arm can do anyway. Whereas the other one kind of extends. Anyway. There's heaps of videos on it, just look it up. Now, if you want me to make a more in-depth review of this gimbal, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below, because I've already invested the money into this, so I might as well make another video or two about this and, you know, really kind of get the mileage that I've paid for. And in this video, I haven't really covered a lot of the features that this gimbal has, so I would be more than happy to do it. Just let me know down below. Alright, I think I'm done with this video. I've said everything that I wanted to say about this gimbal. It's time for me to go and spend the rest of my Christmas with my family and not just talking to this particular piece of plastic. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to drop it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.